Black millionaire denied flight on her own private jet. Pilot fired instantly when he learns the truth. Ever wondered what it's like to be turned away from a flight you rightfully own? This true tale revolves around a self-made black woman millionaire who was shockingly denied access to her own private jet. How did simple assumptions lead to an explosive showdown on the tarmac? And what unexpected turn of events pushed the culprit to face instant consequences? Stay tuned for a riveting story of resilience, ambition, and a dose of well-deserved karma. Before we begin, where are you watching from today? Let us know in the comments. If you love inspiring stories of resilience and justice, make sure to hit that like button, share this video, and subscribe for more incredible tales. Your support helps us share these impactful stories with even more people. Now let's get into it. The sun rose over the city of angels, painting the sky with gentle streaks of violet and pink. The early morning air at Van Nuys Airport in Los Angeles had a crispness that hinted at the possibilities of a new day. Private jets lined the tarmac, each an emblem of success and exclusivity. Ground crews buzzed around these sleek machines, guiding them into position, fueling them up, and performing last-minute safety checks. Standing beside a gleaming Bombardier Global 6000, Clarice Jones took a moment to absorb the subtle hum of airport life that surrounded her. She was wearing a simple black blazer over a cream-colored blouse, paired with comfortable jeans and flats. In her hand, she clutched a slim black folder containing her flight details and business documents. At 34, Clarice had already achieved what many people only dream of. She was a self-made millionaire, the founder and CEO of Skywave Innovations, a technology company specialized in artificial intelligence solutions for large corporations. The purchase of this particular jet, an extravagant leap she had taken 6 months ago, had been a direct result of a sizzling piece of news, a major software security contract worth tens of millions of dollars. Her company had soared in valuation, and Clarice, always one for bold moves, decided to invest in her own means of global travel. There had been something thrilling about attending the Business Expo in Singapore earlier that year and watching her plane's tail number recognized across continents. Yet, on this particular morning, as she took in the sight of the shining silver fuselage and stylized CJ logo near the tail, she felt a pang of anxiety. Today's flight was crucial. She was scheduled to fly to Tokyo for a high-stakes negotiation with potential Japanese investors, an expansion she had worked tirelessly on for nearly a year. If all went well, she'd walk away with a deal that would catapult Skywave Innovations into an even brighter stratosphere. As she glanced at her phone to check the time, a slender figure in a crisp pilot's uniform approached. The man looked to be in his mid-50s, hair streaked with gray, eyes scanning the tarmac as if searching for someone more important. His posture was upright, almost rigid, and he carried himself with an air of superiority. Above his left pocket was a neat name badge, Captain Robert Smith. He'd been sent by the jet management company that handled her flight logistics, an arrangement she'd made for convenience, never suspecting it would become a source of trouble. Clarice gave a polite smile and extended a hand. "Good morning, Captain. I'm Clarice Jones." "You must be the cleaning personnel," the pilot interrupted, looking her up and down. "I was told we have a flight this morning for a Mr. Jones, but I'm not sure who arranged for additional staff here." Clarice blinked, momentarily taken aback. She lowered her hand, confusion stretching across her face. "I'm sorry, I believe there's been a misunderstanding. I'm the passenger, actually. I'm the owner." Captain Robert's eyebrows rose, his expression instantly mingling doubt with a hint of condescension. "You're the passenger?" He paused, clearing his throat. "I see. Well, I apologize for the confusion, but I was told I'd be flying Mr. Jones today. Where is he?" Clarice's heart sank. She had grown used to people making incorrect assumptions about her, especially when they saw a young, black woman in a context they didn't expect. Normally, she'd brush it off politely, but this pilot's tone carried more than simple confusion. There was a dismissiveness to it that made her spine stiffen. "I am Clarice Jones," she said calmly, accentuating her words. "You'll be flying me today, Captain." He squinted, lips pressed into a thin line. She watched disbelief settle on his face, as though he were struggling to process her statement. "That's unusual," he finally managed. "I was informed the owner's name is Clarice Jones, but I was expecting." Clarice sighed inwardly. There it was, the subtle, uncomfortable mismatch between someone's preconceived notions and the reality of her success. "I assure you, Captain, I am indeed who you were expecting." Despite her annoyance, she did her best to remain composed. "If you need proof of identification, I have my passport and the registration documents for the jet." Captain Robert offered a curt nod, though he still appeared unconvinced. He stepped closer and lowered his voice, as though trying to handle her carefully. "Let's do that. Let me see your documents." As Clarice pulled out her documents, a swirl of conflicting emotions welled up inside her. She had dreamed of the day she could proudly show her name on the registration for a private jet. She had pictured casual, quick check-ins, complete with grateful staff and top-tier service. Instead, this moment felt humiliating. She was forced to prove her right to be there before even climbing aboard her own aircraft. She handed over her passport, driver's license, and a copy of the plane's registration. Captain Robert scrolled through them one by one, his eyes darting from the papers to her face. People from the ground crew continued their tasks around them, fueling other jets or loading luggage. They glanced over occasionally, but seemed too busy to intervene. "Yes," he said brusquely, "these are certainly the registration documents for this bombardier." His eyes flicked over her ID once more. Then, he cleared his throat. "And your name matches." "I see." Clarice let out a breath. "Well, that settles it then," she said, a note of relief in her voice. She reached out to take back her documents. "Shall we board?" Captain Robert, however, did not return her documents. His grip on them tightened as he moved one step back, scanning the horizon. "I'd like to verify these with the management company," he said. "If you'll just wait here a moment." Confusion and anger flooded Clarice. "But you just verified them," she insisted, "and these are obviously authentic. You can see the seal, my name, the—" He shook his head. "I'm sorry, ma'am," he said, the condescension in his tone now unmistakable. "I've never flown you before, and, to be honest, it's highly irregular to find the principal traveling alone, without any entourage, especially in a context like this. I'm going to need to check with my superiors. Airport security will need to confirm as well." Before she could protest, he turned on his heel and began walking away. Clarice stood there, the crisp air of the morning stinging her cheeks, as a mixture of disbelief and anger took hold. The day was barely beginning, and already the promise of a smooth flight had been shattered. She glanced over at the plane that bore her initials, thinking back to the long nights, the endless board meetings, the negotiations with investors, everything she'd sacrificed to get here. And now, in a single breath, all her achievements seemed overshadowed by a pilot who refused to believe in the simple fact of her ownership. Farther down the tarmac, a few airport workers began to gather, sensing something amiss. Clarice closed her eyes and exhaled, steeling herself for whatever challenge lay ahead. There was too much at stake to allow this to derail her. She intended to board that plane, pilot or no pilot, and take off for Tokyo to secure the biggest deal of her life. Clarice's heart thudded in her chest as she watched Captain Robert walk briskly toward a small administrative building adjacent to the runway. She felt the urge to call out to him, to demand an explanation, but a part of her knew it wouldn't help. Instead, she took out her phone and dialed the jet management company's contact number. While it rang, she forced a steadying breath. "Good morning, you've reached Vanguard Aviation Management. This is Lucy speaking. How can I help you?" A chipper voice answered. Clarice briefly explained the situation, voice trembling with a combination of frustration and urgency. "I need to get in the air as soon as possible. I'm traveling to Tokyo for a major business meeting. Captain Robert Smith is refusing to let me board. He claims I need further verification." On the other end, Lucy sounded shocked. "Miss Jones, that's highly unusual. Let me pull up your file. You've been a client of ours for months now, and everything is in order. We apologize for this. I'll speak to the base manager immediately. We'll get to the bottom of it." "Please do," Clarice replied, pressing her free hand to her temple. It was starting to ache. "And please inform the pilot that I need wheels up in an hour, or else I risk missing my connection in Hawaii." Lucy promised to escalate the matter. They ended the call, and Clarice slid her phone back into her blazer pocket. She scanned the tarmac and noticed a security guard, a tall man wearing a fluorescent vest, heading in her direction. He had a radio in one hand, and from the concern in his eyes, she could guess he was here about the incident. "Good morning, ma'am," he said, offering an awkward smile. "Is everything all right? We received a notice about a potential unauthorized passenger." Clarice closed her eyes briefly, praying for patience. When she opened them again, she matched his gaze. "Yes, I'm Miss Jones, the owner of that Bombardier Global 6000, she said, pointing. "There's been a misunderstanding with the pilot. Here are my documents." She again handed over her passport and plane registration. The guard studied them, nodded, then spoke into his radio. "Base, this is Officer Davis. I have Miss Jones here, and I've confirmed her identification matches the plane registration. Over." A crackle on the other end. "Stand by," came a disembodied voice. Clarice felt her pulse pounding. She needed to get through this quickly. She had a meeting that couldn't wait. Memories of all her other run-ins with assumptions, with prejudice, flitted through her mind. She dealt with restaurant hosts who assumed she couldn't afford a reservation, investors who doubted her pedigree, even prospective clients who expressed skepticism that a black woman could be the head of a tech firm. She'd learned to handle these run-ins with diplomacy and steely resolve, but each instance left a subtle bruise on her spirit. After a minute of radio chatter, Officer Davis gave Clarice back her documents with a polite nod. "Base confirms you're good to go, Miss Jones." He paused, a look of sympathy crossing his face. "I'm sorry for the inconvenience. Let me see if I can help expedite your boarding." She smiled gratefully. "I appreciate that, Officer Davis." She watched him walk toward the plane and speak briefly with one of the ground crew. The knot in her chest loosened slightly. At least security was on her side now. No sooner had her hope risen than she saw Captain Robert re-emerge from the administrative building. He was accompanied by an airport official in a suit. Even from a distance, Clarice could read the tension in their body language. The official seemed to be gesturing toward the plane, pointing out the tail number. Captain Robert shook his head vigorously, as if protesting something. Then, both men started walking toward her. As they approached, Clarice straightened her posture. She would stand her ground. The official, whose name tag read Brian King, gave her a crisp, professional smile. "Good morning, Miss Jones. I'm the base manager here. Captain Robert has raised some concerns." She cut him off, tired of this repeated cycle. "Mr. King, I've already shown my credentials to Officer Davis. The documents are authentic, and I am the legal owner of this aircraft. It's all in Vanguard Aviation Management System." Brian King nodded sympathetically. "I understand. Let me confirm with our internal system, just to be absolutely sure." He held out a tablet for Clarice to sign in and verify her user credentials. With practiced ease, she entered her details. The system recognized her immediately, bringing up a full profile with a photograph, her ownership certificate, and flight logs. King glanced at the data, then smiled. "Everything checks out, Miss Jones. My apologies for any inconvenience." Captain Robert, arms folded across his chest, cleared his throat. "It's not that I doubt your system, Brian, but this is highly irregular. A single passenger, with no advance notice, no flight manifest with additional staff. I've never encountered an owner traveling like this. It's suspicious." Clarice's temper flared. Her voice was cold as she addressed him directly. "Suspicious, Captain? Is that standard procedure in your decades of flying? To assume that someone like me can't possibly own a plane? Or do you have some other reason for your skepticism?" A flicker of emotion crossed his eyes. Perhaps it was shame, or maybe just annoyance. He held up his hands defensively. "I'm just doing my job, Miss Jones, ensuring the safety and security of the flight." The base manager intervened before Clarice could retort. "Captain, we have completed the verification process. Miss Jones is indeed who she says she is. She is cleared to board." He turned to Clarice again. "I apologize. We value you as a client of Vanguard Aviation. If you need anything else, please let me know." Captain Robert offered no apology. Instead, he simply nodded, turned on his heel, and headed back toward the plane, leaving Clarice with the distinct impression that this was far from over. As she followed him across the tarmac, she stole a quick glance at her watch. She had less than an hour to take off if she wanted to make her connection in Hawaii on time, and that connection was crucial to her final arrival in Tokyo. Anxiety churned in her stomach. She needed to call her Tokyo contact and confirm she would still make the scheduled dinner meeting. When Clarice stepped onto the jet's plush interior for the first time that day, she hesitated, pausing at the threshold. Usually, she loved this moment. The crisp smell of leather seating, the glint of polished surfaces, the feeling of stepping into a sanctuary that symbolized her hard-won independence. But the tension with Captain Robert had stolen some of that joy. Ignoring the sourness lingering in the air, She entered a passcode on the small panel near the door, activating her personal settings. The lights inside the cabin brightened to a warm, welcoming glow. Clarice took a seat near a large window, set her phone on the mahogany table, and opened her laptop to finalize a few presentation slides. She tried to shove aside the unpleasant memory of her conversation with the pilot just moments before. In the cockpit, she could hear muffled voices, likely the pilot and co-pilot running through flight checks. Clarice's mind slipped into strategy mode. She would check her email, confirm with her Tokyo contact, and use whatever time she had left to prepare her pitch. Soon enough, she was on a call with her team in San Francisco, reassuring them that everything was on track. But, as the minutes ticked by, she noticed the plane hadn't moved. The engines remained silent. She put her colleagues on hold and stepped into the narrow corridor that led to the cockpit. The door was ajar, revealing Captain Robert hunched over the instrument panel with his headset on. The co-pilot, a younger woman, was seated beside him, her expression tense. Clarice rapped lightly on the open door. "Captain Robert, we're running behind schedule. Is there something wrong with the plane?" He did not turn around. "I'm awaiting final clearance from the tower," he said icily. She felt a tremor of frustration. "Final clearance? For a flight plan I filed 3 days ago? I was told everything was set." He shrugged one shoulder. "Things change." The co-pilot glanced over at Clarice apologetically. It was clear she felt the tension but didn't want to contradict her superior. Clarice swallowed hard. "We need to depart soon if I'm going to make my connecting flight, Captain." Captain Robert sighed, as though burdened by a weighty chore. "I can't depart until the tower gives me the green light, ma'am." Sensing the futility of arguing, Clarice returned to the cabin and sank into her seat. She might have believed the tower was truly delaying them after all. Airports could be busy, but his tone made her suspicious. Was he deliberately stalling? She fired off a quick text to Lucy at Vanguard Aviation, asking her to look into the holdup. 45 minutes later, the engines finally roared to life. By then, Clarice's schedule was in serious jeopardy. Her phone buzzed. Lucy had responded, "No tower delays. Should be cleared for takeoff." Clarice's eyes narrowed. No tower delays. Then it had to be Captain Robert. Despite the turmoil, the plane started taxiing. Relief swept through her. She prayed she could still make the connection, or that there might be some way to rearrange her schedule. One thing was certain. If she missed that crucial meeting, the entire Tokyo deal might be in peril. As the bombardier picked up speed and lifted into the sky, Clarice felt an odd mixture of triumph and anger. She was finally leaving Los Angeles, but the headache left behind by Captain Robert's suspicion clung to her. Deep down, she suspected this wouldn't be the last time he'd challenge her legitimacy. And she was right. No sooner had the jet reached cruising altitude than Captain Robert's voice filled the cabin via the overhead speaker. "Miss Jones, may I speak with you in the cockpit?" Clarice's stomach twisted. They were barely 30 minutes into the flight, and he was summoning her. She glanced around at the luxurious cabin, the curved leather seats, the tasteful abstract art on the walls, the white orchids perched in a vase near the entrance. Normally, such details calmed her. Today, every little flourish seemed overshadowed by a sense of dread. Taking her phone in hand, she stood and made her way back to the cockpit. The door was closed this time, so she gently knocked. The co-pilot opened it, her gaze flickering nervously between Clarice and Captain Robert, who sat with his hands resting on his thighs. "Close the door," Captain Robert instructed, addressing the co-pilot. As soon as the door clicked shut, he turned his attention to Clarice. "I have some concerns about our flight plan," he said. "We're scheduled to land in Honolulu for refueling, correct?" She nodded, uncertain. "Yes, that's the standard route. It's what I arranged with Vanguard." The pilot tapped a touchscreen in front of him. "The documentation you provided indicates you have a meeting in Tokyo within a very tight window. We're cutting it close, but it's feasible. However, I'm going to need to see further proof that you're authorized to be in Tokyo with that plane." Clarice's mouth fell open slightly. "Authorized to be in Tokyo? What does that mean?" Captain Robert shifted in his seat, adopting a patronizing tone. "There are restrictions on private aircraft entering certain airspaces, especially if the occupant is not well documented. It's a security concern. If you can't produce the proper clearances, we might have to cancel the flight midway." She felt her temper flare again. "I've traveled internationally on this jet before, Captain. Everything has always been in order. I have the necessary clearances for my flight to Japan." I filed them with Vanguard Aviation, and they submitted all required documentation to the relevant authorities. He gave a thin smile. I see. But, in my experience, some owners prefer to carry that documentation personally. So, if you wouldn't mind showing me your entry permissions, I'd appreciate it. It was a ridiculous request, something that should have been handled by the management company and the relevant aviation authorities well before departure. Clarice had never been asked to carry such documents in her personal possession, nor had any pilot demanded them mid-flight. The scalding realization that he was inventing hoops for her to jump through stung. She fought to keep her voice steady. Captain Robert, I'm aware of my rights and my responsibilities as an aircraft owner. Everything you're asking for is filed electronically. You can contact Vanguard, you can check the flight logs, but I will not tolerate these endless demands for proof that I belong here. I've already gone above and beyond what's required. He regarded her with a long, silent stare. Finally, he shrugged. Well, if that's how it is, then so be it. I'll see what I can do. She blinked. What does that mean? He didn't answer. Instead, he swiveled back to the controls, effectively dismissing her. The co-pilot shot Clarice a sympathetic glance, but said nothing. Feeling a flush creep up her neck, Clarice turned and left the cockpit, seething. She wasn't sure what game the pilot was playing, but she vowed to contact Vanguard again. As she sat down, she opened her phone and dashed off a series of texts to Lucy, detailing everything that had just happened. She considered calling their legal counsel, but held back, hoping Lucy could resolve the matter more smoothly. The rest of the flight to Honolulu was a quiet form of torture. Turbulence rocked the plane, but it was nothing compared to the tension coursing through Clarice's veins. She tried to distract herself with business proposals, updating slides, and responding to her staff's queries about the upcoming meeting in Tokyo. Yet, her mind kept drifting back to Captain Robert, his condescending tone and the barely veiled hostility in his eyes. Eventually, the plane began its descent into Honolulu. Clarice peered through the window at the sapphire waters that surrounded the island. Normally, the sight filled her with excitement. Hawaii was a place of magic, the gateway between the continental U.S. and the broader Pacific. This time, though, she was too unsettled to enjoy the scenery. The moment the wheels touched the runway, she reached for her phone, hoping to find an update from Lucy or someone else at Vanguard. She was in luck. A message from Lucy appeared. We've contacted Captain Robert's supervisor and explained the situation. Rest assured, we're handling it. Please let me know if you face any more complications. Clarice breathed a sigh of relief. If Vanguard's top-level management got involved, Captain Robert would have no choice but to comply. Perhaps the second leg of the journey would be smoother. She loosened her seatbelt and prepared to exit the plane. Once the doors opened, the ground crew in Honolulu would likely come on board to refuel, check supplies, and do a quick inspection before takeoff. As she walked down the steps onto the Hawaiian tarmac, the warm, tropical air caressed her cheeks. She spotted a few palm trees in the distance, swaying gently in the breeze. For a moment, she stood there, eyes closed, letting the sun's rays wash over her. Despite the chaos, she told herself that everything would be fine. She had come too far in life to be thwarted by one obstinate pilot. 15 minutes later, Clarice remained on the tarmac, talking with the local refueling crew. They recognized her from previous stops and greeted her politely, with not a trace of suspicion. This small kindness felt like a balm. She asked them about the timeline for the refueling, and they assured her it would only take about 20 minutes. Satisfied, she climbed back up the steps, intending to retreat to the cabin and review some final details. At the top, however, she found Captain Robert blocking the entryway. His face was grim, and he held a clipboard in his hand. Miss Jones, he began, his voice flat. I've just received some news from my supervisor. It appears they're fully aware of your concerns. Clarice bristled. They're not just my concerns, Captain. You have been discriminating against me from the start. You've created unnecessary delays, and I'm behind schedule for an important meeting. He pursed his lips. Well, if you're unhappy, you're free to find another pilot. She stood a little straighter. Maybe I will. He snorted. Good luck finding one on such short notice in Honolulu. For a split second, Clarice felt the full weight of her predicament. Finding another pilot spontaneously on a layover in Honolulu wasn't a trivial task. She also worried that, even if she tried, the entire flight schedule would be disrupted further. It might take hours, or even a day, to arrange a new crew time she didn't have. Captain Robert seemed to sense her hesitation. I'm glad we agree, he said, stepping aside so she could pass. I suggest you take your seat. We'll depart soon, assuming the clearance goes smoothly. Gritting her teeth, Clarice swept past him without a word. She tried calling Lucy again, but it went to voicemail. Perhaps Lucy was already in the middle of sorting things out at her end. As she settled into her seat, she replayed the pilot's words, noticing the sneer on his face when he said them. What was his real motive? Did he simply not believe a black woman could own such an expensive aircraft? Or did he resent her success for another reason? She had encountered people who felt threatened by her achievements before, but never a pilot in her own employ. Refusing to let him intimidate her, she sent a direct email to the head of Vanguard Aviation's operations team, outlining the entire sequence of events. She added that she might seek legal recourse if this interference caused her to lose a multi-million-dollar contract. Clicking send, she leaned back and waited. The plane's doors closed, and she heard the engines fire up once more. Soon, they were taxiing down the Honolulu runway, the turquoise ocean glinting beyond a mocking reminder of the peace that seemed so out of reach. High above the Pacific Ocean, the plane soared through cottony clouds, gliding smoothly now that the refueling was complete. Clarice stared at her laptop screen, but her concentration was shot. Her thoughts kept drifting, pulled by the undertow of memories, moments that had shaped her life, her identity, and her determination to succeed against all odds. She was 13 again, standing in a cramped library in South Los Angeles. The fluorescent lights hummed overhead. She remembered the day she discovered a dilapidated computer in the corner, keys missing, letters faded. No one else wanted it, but she was fascinated. The librarian gave her permission to tinker with it, and tinker she did, cleaning out dust, plugging in cables, installing outdated software. When she finally booted it up, a rush of excitement coursed through her veins. From that point on, Clarice's fascination with technology knew no bounds. She soaked up knowledge wherever she could find it: school programs, free online coding tutorials, library books on hardware and software. It was an escape from the harsh realities of her neighborhood, where sirens were more common than success stories. It gave her a sense of control, a glimpse into a better future. Fast forward to her 20s. She was a computer science major at a state university. Most of her classmates were men, many were white or Asian. She often felt invisible in group projects, overshadowed by louder voices. But rather than wilt, Clarice channeled her frustration into deeper study, spending late nights in the lab. She graduated with honors, no small feat, considering she was working 2 part-time jobs to cover tuition and living expenses. After college, she landed an entry-level job at a tech firm in Silicon Valley. She quickly made waves with her innovative solutions, but when promotions came around, she was passed over multiple times. One manager bluntly told her, "You're great, but I'm not sure you fit the profile we're looking for in leadership." Infuriated but fueled by ambition, she decided to strike out on her own. She created Skywave Innovations in the cramped corner of her apartment, forging a new path. The early days were a blur of sleepless nights, code deployments, and frantic pitches to potential investors, many of whom doubted her. She recalled one humiliating VC meeting where an older man asked, "Are you the marketing girl? Where's the founder?" And she had to calmly state that she was both the founder and the CTO, handling all aspects of her fledgling startup. She left that meeting empty-handed but even more resolute to succeed. Success didn't come overnight, but slowly, the software she developed gained traction. Skywave's artificial intelligence solutions revolutionized data security protocols for small to mid-sized businesses. Then came a major client, a global financial institution that recognized her genius for safeguarding sensitive transactions. Soon, word spread. She won an innovation award, then landed a Forbes 30 Under 30 feature. Investment capital poured in. Her staff grew, and so did her influence. Then, just over a year ago, she sealed a game-changing deal with a Fortune 500 company. The terms were extraordinary, catapulting Skywave's valuation well into the hundreds of millions. That was the turning point when she first considered buying her own aircraft. With so much international travel on her schedule, investor meetings in London, tech expos in Singapore, negotiation rounds in Dubai, owning a private jet made sense. It was a bold move, but it also represented a dream realized: the ability to move freely across the globe without barriers. A faint smile tugged at her lips as she remembered the day the Bombardier Global 6000 arrived. She named it Horizons, a nod to the boundless future she believed was possible. But this was also the first time she discovered a subtle undercurrent of suspicion. When she visited the hangar for an orientation, the staff kept asking, "And your husband? Is he the primary occupant?" She had to correct them repeatedly. It was a jarring reminder that many people still couldn't imagine her as the principal. Yet, she pressed on. Now, as turbulence jostled the plane, Clarice glanced at her watch. Time was ticking. If they maintained course, they'd land at Narita Airport around 6 p.m. local time. She had dinner scheduled at 8 p.m. with the Japanese investors. That was barely enough time to go through customs, freshen up, and head to the restaurant. The overhead speaker crackled, jarring her from her reverie. "Miss Jones, this is Captain Robert," he said stiffly. "We're about 2 hours out from Honolulu, or roughly 5 hours away from Tokyo. But I just received a weather advisory that might affect our route." Clarice frowned. "Weather advisory? Are we diverting?" There was a pause. "I'm checking with air traffic control. We might need to slow down or alter our path slightly." Her heart sank. Another delay. She took a deep breath. "Focus on what you can control," she told herself. She went back to her laptop, though she could barely concentrate. If this deal fell through because of delays, would she have legal grounds to sue Vanguard, or even Captain Robert personally, for sabotage? The notion was extreme, but her frustration was mounting. When the plane entered a pocket of heavier turbulence, Clarice clung to the armrest, bracing herself. The cockpit door remained closed, and she found herself wondering if Captain Robert was enjoying this, exerting power by controlling her flight. She shook the thought away, reminding herself that no pilot would willingly put a plane at risk for a personal vendetta. But his attitude that was undeniable. At length, the turbulence eased, and she returned to her seat. She closed her eyes, letting out a long breath. If she could just hold on until they reached Tokyo, she would handle Captain Robert and Vanguard later. Her ultimate focus had to be the business deal. She needed to be in top form for the meeting. But the emotional strain was wearing her down. The seatbelt sign dinged, and she opened her eyes again. Part of her longed to simply stand up and vent her anger, to let Captain Robert know he'd messed with the wrong person. But she'd learned the hard way that anger, if not carefully channeled, could do more harm than good. She had to stay composed, no matter how deep the injustice. When the pilot announced their final approach into Narita Airport, Clarice's palms were damp with sweat. She was short on time. A quick check of the flight time suggested she'd have barely 90 minutes before her dinner meeting. She needed to clear customs, gather any luggage, and rush to her hotel to change. This was going to be tight. At least the landing was smooth. She felt a small sense of relief as the wheels touched Japanese soil. Through the window, she caught glimpses of the airport's bustling activity. Passengers scurrying, planes from around the globe parked in orderly rows, terminal windows reflecting the evening sun. She loved Japan. It was a place where technology melded seamlessly with tradition, and business was conducted with deep respect for etiquette. But her momentary admiration was cut short when, upon taxiing to the private aircraft terminal, she noticed a flurry of activity on the tarmac. 3 airport officials, wearing dark suits and ID badges, stood waiting near the designated parking area for her plane. Their posture was formal, and they seemed prepared for some kind of inspection. The Bombardier door opened, and Clarice was about to step out when Captain Robert blocked the exit once again. His face was more severe than ever. "I've informed the local authorities that you may not have the appropriate documentation to land this aircraft in Japan," he said, his words quiet, menacing. A chill ran down Clarice's spine. "Are you serious?" she managed, her voice trembling with anger. "You told them that I lacked documentation, despite me providing everything to you and Vanguard?" He didn't reply, only gesturing for her to exit. "You can sort it out with them, Miss Jones." Furious, Clarice stepped onto the staircase, head held high, her face set in determination. The 3 officials approached, bowing slightly in greeting. She responded with a respectful bow of her own. One of them, a middle-aged man in a crisp black suit, stepped forward. "Good evening, Miss Jones," he said in accented English. "I am Kenji Tanaka from Narita Immigration and Customs. May I confirm your documents and reason for travel?" She pulled out her passport, along with a digital copy of the aircraft's clearance from her phone. "Certainly, Mr. Tanaka. Everything is in order. I have the required permissions for landing this private aircraft." My management company, Vanguard Aviation, filed the flight plan well in advance. I'm here for a business meeting. Tanaka nodded politely as he scanned her documents. The other two officials stood by, exchanging words in Japanese. After a moment, Tanaka turned to Captain Robert. It appears everything is correct. Why did you report a discrepancy? Captain Robert feigned innocence. I merely wanted to make sure the authorities were fully informed. There was some confusion regarding ownership details and Miss Jones's status as a passenger. Clarice bit her tongue, refusing to blow up in front of these officials. If she lost her temper now, it could reflect poorly on her. She was in Japan, after all, where decorum could make or break a business relationship. Tanaka gave Captain Robert a subtle frown. Thank you, Captain, but Miss Jones's documentation is sufficient. Welcome to Japan, Miss Jones. We apologize for any inconvenience. He bowed again, and Clarice returned the gesture, with relief surging through her chest. The other officials stepped away, apparently satisfied. Clarice watched them go, then turned to glare at Captain Robert. Before she could say anything, he pivoted and walked back up the steps into the plane, leaving her standing there, seething. The clock was ticking. She had no time for a confrontation. With a frustrated sigh, she hurried across the tarmac, heading toward the waiting black sedan that Vanguard had arranged to transport her to the hotel. As she settled into the back seat, she called Lucy one more time. This time, Lucy picked up. Clarice, what happened? She asked, concern evident in her voice. Clarice relayed the fresh insult that Captain Robert had apparently reported her to Japanese authorities in a last-ditch effort to find something wrong. Lucy gasped. That's outrageous. I've already escalated this to the highest levels at Vanguard. They're furious. He's on thin ice as it is. There have been a handful of prior complaints about him, though nothing quite like this. I guarantee this will be his last flight under Vanguard, if you decide so. Clarice closed her eyes, letting Lucy's words sink in. She felt an odd combination of anger, exhaustion, and grim satisfaction. I want him off my plane as soon as possible, she said, her tone sharp. He doesn't deserve to fly for me again. Lucy assured her that steps would be taken immediately. For now, though, Clarice had to focus on her meeting. She ended the call, then peered out the window at the neon-lit highways of Tokyo, cars streaming by like reflections of the city's pulse. Despite her rage, she felt a spark of energy. She was in Japan, a place of endless innovation. She would not let one hateful pilot ruin this crucial moment. Tokyo's skyline shimmered against the evening sky. By the time Clarice arrived at her hotel, she practically sprinted through the lobby, ignoring the marble columns and ornate flower arrangements. 20 minutes later, she was back downstairs, dressed in a sleek navy blue sheath dress with a matching blazer. Her heart pounded as she slipped into another waiting car, heading straight for the upscale restaurant in the Ginza district. She arrived with only minutes to spare. The hostess, a graceful woman in a kimono, led her to a private room where her prospective investors, Tanaka-san and Watanabe-san, were already seated. They rose politely as she entered, bowing in unison. Clarice bowed in return, then offered greetings in her best formal Japanese. She could feel her nerves tingling, the strain of the day's events biting at her concentration. Thankfully, the dinner started smoothly. The conversation began with polite small talk about her flight, her impressions of Tokyo, and the mild weather. Clarice forced a tranquil smile, not wanting to delve into the fiasco she had just endured. When the discussion shifted to technology and Skywave's expansion plans, she found her stride. She opened her laptop to present slides detailing her vision, a global platform that would protect financial institutions, energy companies, and even government agencies from data breaches using AI-driven analytics. The two investors listened intently, their expressions neutral yet inquisitive. Time seemed to blur as she explained data sets, predictive modeling, and projected ROI. She had always thrived in this environment, selling a concept, weaving a narrative that tied together innovation, security, and profitability. Despite her exhaustion, her passion shone through. About an hour in, Tanaka-san closed his folder. Miss Jones, he said in carefully measured English, your proposal is very compelling. However, you must understand, we are looking for a partner who is prepared for long-term commitment. We have heard excellent things about you and Skyway from our U.S. partners, but we'd like to see more direct engagement in Asia. How do you plan to localize your technology for the Japanese market? Clarice nodded, smiling softly. This was the question she'd been preparing for. She navigated to a slide that showcased her plan for a branch office in Tokyo, complete with bilingual staff who would handle local client relations. She detailed how her software could incorporate Japanese language datasets to make the AI more adept at analyzing local text and speech patterns. Watanabe-san, who had been quiet for most of the presentation, finally spoke. Very interesting. This shows you have done your research. I also see you have worked with institutions in Singapore. That bodes well for your adaptability in Asia. Encouraged, Clarice elaborated on her experiences in Singapore, her approach to cultural nuances, and how she believed trust building was as vital as technological excellence. The dialogue flowed more freely now, with questions and answers volleying back and forth. Finally, near the end of the meal, Tanaka-san took a sip of tea and exchanged a glance with Watanabe-san. They seemed to come to a silent agreement. Miss Jones, Tanaka began, we appreciate your efforts in meeting with us. Before we proceed further, we would like to conduct a thorough due diligence. This is standard procedure, but given your track record, I see no major obstacles. A thrill coursed through Clarice. This was exactly the outcome she'd hoped for, a sign that they were inclined to invest, pinning final checks. She breathed a silent sigh of relief. I look forward to working through any details you require, she replied graciously. As the dinner concluded, Tanaka-san and Watanabe-san rose, bowing in thanks. We will be in touch soon, Watanabe-san promised. They exchanged business cards, an important ritual in Japan, and parted ways. It wasn't until Clarice was back inside the car, rolling past the storefronts of Ginza, that she allowed herself to exhale fully. The meeting had gone well, better than she dared to hope after the day she'd had. She texted Lucy. Meeting was a success. Need to talk about pilot situations soon. The next morning, Clarice awoke in her hotel suite to a flurry of notifications. Emails, texts, and missed calls lit up her phone. Rubbing her eyes, she scrolled through the messages. Most were from her stateside team, congratulating her on the successful preliminary talks with Tanaka-san and Watanabe-san. But a handful were from Vanguard Aviation and her legal counsel. Subject, urgent, Captain Robert Smith. From Vanguard Aviation Management. To Clarice Jones. Miss Jones, please be advised that Captain Robert Smith has been suspended pending a full investigation into his conduct on your flight. We have reviewed logs, security footage, and statements from you and multiple parties. The evidence is deeply concerning. Our senior management will be in Tokyo later today to speak with you in person and arrange a replacement pilot for your return. Clarice's lips curved into a grim smile. Finally, she opened another message from Allison Thorne, her personal legal advisor, who confirmed that Captain Robert had a history of complaints, some from flight attendants who reported microaggressions and questionable remarks, others from clients who felt he overstepped his bounds. He'd always skirted serious repercussions, but this time, given Clarice's high-profile status, there was no covering it up. Feeling lighter, she showered and got dressed. She was scheduled for a tour of a tech facility later that morning. As she sipped her coffee by the window, gazing at the city's bustling activity below, she pondered how quickly fortunes could change. Yesterday, Captain Robert had tried to sabotage her, or at least humiliate her. Today, he was suspended, possibly facing termination. Karma worked swiftly. That afternoon, while at the tech facility, she received a call from Daniel Dawson, an executive at Vanguard. He was in Tokyo and asked to meet at her hotel. She wrapped up her facility tour and headed back, not entirely sure what to expect. Daniel was waiting in the lobby, a tall, clean-shaven man in a tailored suit, looking every bit the corporate envoy. They shook hands, and he led her to the hotel lounge, where they found a quiet corner. Miss Jones, he began solemnly, I want to personally apologize on behalf of Vanguard Aviation. The way Captain Robert treated you is unacceptable. We've been reviewing the flight records, including the delays he caused, his communications with local authorities, and his refusal to accept your documentation. He also made certain remarks to staff that point to discriminatory bias. Clarice nodded, sipping from a glass of water. She could sense Daniel's embarrassment. I appreciate the apology, she said, but I'm more concerned with how we move forward. I can't risk losing deals because of incompetent or biased pilots. Understood, Daniel said. Captain Robert is officially terminated as of this morning. We have a new pilot on standby here in Tokyo to take you wherever you need to go next, back to Los Angeles, or any other destination. And we'd like to offer you a substantial discount on our services moving forward, in hopes of retaining your business. A wave of relief washed over her. Thank you. I'm glad to hear it. I do need to stay a few more days in Tokyo, then I'll return to LA. I trust this new pilot will be more professional. Daniel nodded vigorously. Absolutely. He comes highly recommended. We've also updated our internal protocols to ensure such incidents are flagged and dealt with immediately. Please accept our deepest apologies. Clarice allowed herself to smile, a genuine one. This time, she still felt the sting of the previous day's injustices, but the swiftness of Vanguard's response and the knowledge that Captain Robert faced consequences served as a balm. For so long, she had endured various forms of discrimination with little recourse. Today, at least, justice felt tangible. They discussed the remaining logistics for her stay in Tokyo and her eventual flight home. By the time Daniel left, Clarice felt a sense of closure. The pilot who had tormented her was gone, fired on the spot once the truth was laid bare. On her final evening in Tokyo, Clarice found herself alone in a sophisticated cocktail lounge on the top floor of her hotel. Jazz music played softly as city lights shimmered through the glass walls. She swirled a small glass of whiskey, letting her mind wander over the whirlwind of the past few days. The fiasco with Captain Robert had nearly derailed her big meeting, yet in the end, she had secured a promising partnership in Japan, and the pilot had been fired for his misconduct. Her phone buzzed a message from an unexpected source. Jasmine Reyes, a fellow tech entrepreneur she'd once competed against for a major contract. Their rivalry had been public, especially on social media, but they'd always maintained a level of respect for each other's achievements. The text read, "Clarice, I heard about what happened with that pilot. Totally unacceptable. Just wanted to say that seeing you come out on top, yet again, is inspiring. Keep breaking ceilings." Clarice's eyes softened. She typed a quick reply of thanks, feeling a strange sense of camaraderie. It reminded her of how vital it was for underrepresented folks in tech, particularly women of color, to support one another. There was power in unity, a power that could dismantle the very barriers people like Captain Robert tried to impose. As she finished her drink, she gazed over the nocturnal splendor of Tokyo, neon lights dancing in the distance. She contemplated her future. This was just the beginning of Skywave's expansion into Asia. Once she returned to the States, she'd finalize the deal with Tanaka-san and Watanabe-san, open an office in Tokyo, and continue forging alliances that would turn her company into a global powerhouse. A few days later, she boarded her Bombardier Global 6000 once more, now with a new pilot at the helm, an experienced and courteous man who welcomed her warmly. There were no suspicious glances, no demands for extraneous paperwork. The flight back to LA was a serene journey across the Pacific, filled with quiet reflection and cautious optimism. When they finally landed at Van Nuys Airport, a wave of déjà vu swept over her. The sun was setting, bathing the runway in a gilded glow. The difference this time? She stepped off her jet feeling entirely at peace. On the tarmac, a few crew members smiled and nodded politely, recognizing her from previous flights. One of them even said, "Welcome home, Miss Jones." Simple words, but enough to remind her that not everyone would question her right to be there. Later that week, she learned that Captain Robert had tried to find employment at another private jet service, but was rejected after word spread of his dismissal for discriminatory practices. In aviation circles, reputations traveled fast. It was the hard karma she had hoped for, though part of her also felt a small pang of pity. If he had only kept an open mind, if he had only treated her with the respect due any client, none of this would have happened. But choices have consequences, and he had made his. Weeks passed. The Tokyo deal became official. Tanaka Watanabe Holdings invested a sizable sum in Skywave Innovations, ensuring a robust footprint in the Asia-Pacific region. The success story made headlines in the business sections of major publications, praising Clarice's resilience and vision. For Clarice, though, the headline she cherished was one she never saw in print. Black woman millionaire denied flight on her own jet. Pilot fired instantly when he learns the truth. It was an odd kind of victory, but a victory nonetheless. It spoke to the countless micro and macroaggressions she had faced and would continue to face on her path. It validated her belief that standing up, speaking out, and refusing to be diminished could yield real change, even if the process was grueling. Late one evening, As she sat in her office high above downtown Los Angeles, she reflected on her journey. The city lights twinkled below, a patchwork of ambition and possibility. On her desk lay a framed photo of her younger self, the teenage girl who fixed that dusty library computer. She smiled at the memory, marveling at how far she had come. Skywave's servers hummed in a nearby room, running advanced simulations and security checks for clients worldwide. On a wall-mounted screen, a world map showcased blinking lights, each representing an installation of her AI technology, forging safer systems for people across the globe. The plane she owned was no mere symbol. It was a tool of progress, bridging continents and cultures. Yet, with every milestone she reached, Clarice was acutely aware that others would follow in her wake. Younger black girls aspiring to be CEOs, women from marginalized backgrounds entering the tech arena. She wanted to ease their journeys, if she could. She planned to create scholarships, mentorship programs, and after-school tech hubs in underserved areas. And perhaps that was the real legacy of these events. The negativity of Captain Robert's bias had unintentionally fueled her determination to build a more inclusive landscape. If one bigoted individual could cause so much stress, imagine what collective empowerment could do. It was a cause she was ready to champion as fiercely as she had championed her own success. In the quiet hush of her office, she closed her laptop and stepped out onto the balcony, letting the soft breeze ruffle her hair. She was free from the constraints of other people's doubts, from the illusions that tried to box her in. She'd proven, yet again, that no obstacle was insurmountable if she relied on her intelligence, courage, and the support of allies. Tomorrow, she'd board her jet again, heading to a conference in New York where she'd deliver a keynote on AI's role in modern finance. She knew she might face more challenges along the way, but if there was one thing Clarice Jones understood, it was that the horizon keeps expanding for those unafraid to chase it. And she intended to soar, on her own terms, in her own aircraft, writing the story of possibility with every new takeoff and touchdown. And so, the pilot who once doubted her stature and success discovered the hard way that prejudice and arrogance have consequences. Meanwhile, our heroine stepped off her own jet with renewed pride, turning a distressing ordeal into a powerful message about resilience and self-worth. If you found this story compelling, make sure to subscribe to our channel so you won't miss out on more real-life lessons, dramatic twists, and inspirational journeys.